Good morning. And this morning I want to talk about the AAA gaming industry. And in particular, I want to talk about the problems that the AAA gaming industry has got and why I think they've got problems. Because they have, and they are problems of their own making. And if you look at what's been going on over the last, couple of years, but specifically in the last few months with both the US and British legislative bodies starting to take serious notice of loot boxes and the inherent problems therein, well, you start to see a picture emerging. We had EA and Epic in front of the House of Commons Select Committee, I believe it was, and trying to squirm their way out of some of the questions and not doing particularly well at that. And EA in particular came up with their now famous quote about surprise mechanics. And as I say, Epic didn't come out of that looking much better. And, we've had so many things going on with the AAA gaming industry. We've had Bethesda with Fallout 76 and coming out and stating almost blatantly that they knew it was broken when they released it, and yet they put it out anyway. We'll put it out and we'll improve it as time goes on if we feel like it. And then we had Randy Pitchford lying. I don't know whether you'd say he was lying, certainly stretching the truth somewhat with Borderlands and claiming that it wouldn't have microtransactions, at which point we then discovered that it will have microtransactions. And okay, the microtransactions aren't any worse than they were in previous versions of Borderlands, but nevertheless, they were there, and he did say they wouldn't be.
We're not doing any of that free-to-play junk. There's not going to be any microtransactions. There's not going to be any of that nonsense.
And then, of course, he got all up in arms because people were being unfair to him. Poor Randy Pitchford, I don't know how much money he's got in the bank, but I think he can take a little bit of criticism. Then we have Activision, the wonderful Activision, putting loot boxes in Call of Duty after the game's been out and after the game's been reviewed. And not only that, putting microtransactions in Modern Warfare, which came out ages ago and didn't have them when it first came out, and the remaster did. So the whole gaming industry is messing us around. And it doesn't even stop there. We've got Warner with Shadow of War. It goes on and on and on, and you guys can probably give me more examples in the comments, and feel free, let's have a chat about it and get into it and talk about all the problems that are going on. The fact is that not a single AAA gaming company looks good as it stands at the moment. And obviously some look worse than others, but they're all chasing the money at the expense of creating quality games at a reasonable price. You can see it. Every year it gets worse. I mean, EA, as just one example, have presided over, an almost unprecedented decline in both quantity and quality. If you look at what happened with EA back in, let's have a look. Back in 2013, which is when Andrew Wilson became EA's CEO, they put out Army of Two, The Devil's Cartel, Battlefield 4, Crysis 3, Dead Space 3, FIFA 14, Fuse, Madden NFL 25, NBA Live 14, NCAA Football 14, Need for Speed Rivals, NHL 14, Tiger Woods PGA 14, and others as well. That's just a kind of list of the bigger games from that year. And obviously the rot had set in prior to Andrew Wilson taking over, and he was, almost entirely responsible for the start of loot boxes in FIFA. And there's a good documentary, and if I can find it, I'll put a link in the description to the documentary talking about the Andrew Wilson loot box and how he pushed it. But if we fast forward to this year, the releases we got this year, FIFA 20, or we are getting this year, FIFA 20, Madden NFL 20, NHL 20, and Star Wars Jedi The Fallen Order. And I know there's some smaller games again there, but the list of games that they are putting out year on year is shrinking. And that's because they are focusing on loot boxes and other forms of monetization. stemming from things like games as a service. Keep 'em playing to keep 'em paying. They're not focusing on creating quality games. They're focusing on creating hooks to keep people playing so they can suck more money out of their wallets. And EA is just one example. They may be one of the most egregious examples, but they are just one. And every single AAA company out there that I can think of is guilty of following this trend. And yet, they think they're the victims, or that they're just misunderstood. EA's Matt Bilby, in a recent interview, said that he doesn't see why they're seen as the bad guy. And he cites EA Originals as a good example of how they're doing the right thing. But that's not enough. That's like a gangster killing people all over the place and ripping off companies and stealing money left, right and centre off men, women, children and babies, and then giving money to charity and saying, look at what a great guy I am. One tiny little positive amongst a mound of negatives doesn't set the ledger straight. But he's not the only one. We've got Take-Two Interactive CEO and the CEO of Zelnick Media Capital saying, if our consumers indicated that they really need to know what kind of mechanics exist before they buy a game, then it would be appropriate for the ESRB to establish those kind of criteria. But I don't think that that's the case. Well, thank you, Strauss. Thank you for telling us gamers what we actually want and what we actually think. Because I, for one, I would like to know what is going into my games. And I would like to know what the potential of me being expected to spend a lot more money to get the full experience of the game would be. And I think a lot of people would like to know these things. And I think a lot of people would like to know if they're buying a game for their kids, if those games have gambling mechanics built into the game. Don't you think, Strauss? Don't you think we'd like to know that? But he doesn't think we're going to get regulation anyway. I don't know why he thinks that. Maybe he knows something we don't. But this is what he says about that. The US government is not going to regulate what monetization mechanics exist inside a video game. That's just not going to happen. That would be just horrible law in a country that has the First Amendment. So I don't believe that will happen. The First Amendment, well, I'm a Brit, but I think that the First Amendment refers to freedom of speech, doesn't it? So what's he saying? That loot boxes are freedom of speech and he should have the freedom to shoehorn them into any game he wants because otherwise we're infringing his freedoms? Okay. The guy's whole outlook seems to be that any legislation that comes in or any complaints coming from games that infringe on his ability to do precisely what he wants is somehow inherently wrong. And I think this goes to what I can only describe as narcissism. And I think there's some evidence for Strauss-Zelnick being a narcissist, given that he wrote a book entitled Becoming Ageless, The 4 Secrets to Looking and Feeling Younger Than Ever, along with the fact that every time I look him up, I seem to find topless pictures of the guy. He's a narcissist as far as I can see. I don't know, maybe I'm doing the guy a disservice, but he strikes me as somebody who thinks that he should be able to do precisely what he wants without any oversight or anyone infringing those perceived rights. As I say, he comes across as a narcissist. And this seems to be an ongoing theme with the AAA gaming industry. You look at people like Bobby Kotick. He's got an estimated personal fortune of $7 billion. And yet that seems to be not enough. Year on year, Activision seem to want to squeeze more and more in terms of microtransactions and other ways of monetizing their games into those properties in order to squeeze as much money as they can out of the gamer. And at the same time, as I say, They complain if anyone moans about it and says there's something wrong going on here. And they fight legislation at every turn and employ every single trick in the book straight out of the tobacco company's playbook of obfuscating, of using sleight of hand, of trying to change the picture. You know, like with EA, with we don't call them loot boxes, we call them surprise mechanics. Surprise mechanics. Kiss my arse, EA. Surprise mechanics. But this is what they do. And even someone like Phil Spencer, someone who, for the most part, I respect, and I think he's one of the better people in the industry. But even he comes out with some utter nonsense when we get onto this subject. And this is what he said. As I look at some of the legislation, I think we have a lot of education to do in certain places. Yeah, right. He goes on to say, when I sit down with people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, who maybe aren't in the industry and are painting with a broad brush with what I think is kind of a specific term, I think we should educate our customers on what is in a game and how the monetization in that game works. Educate us, Phil. Educate us. I think we're pretty well educated. A lot of us play a lot of games, and there's a lot of people out there who play a lot more games than me because they're not making bloody videos about video games, so they're actually playing the bloody things. We play a lot of games. We've seen the change in the industry. We've seen it go from a situation where you buy a game and you play the game and then you buy and play the next game, to having horse armor and having season packs and all sorts of different ways of trying to shoehorn more money out of us. And it's got more and more egregious as the years have gone on. And if you are thinking that you can try and educate us to think that things like loot boxes are a good thing, well, you may have some joy with some of those people out there who are already invested in spending lots of money, an awful lot of money in these things. But those people are the very problem we're talking about here. Those are the people who have an issue with gambling addiction. Those are the people who have problems that we need to be looking at. And the problem here is, as much as you want to educate people, so do we. The gamers out there, people like Jim Sterling, people like Young Yeah, people like on a much smaller level like me, we want to educate people too. And we want to make them realize that when you are putting loot boxes in games, they are tantamount to gambling. And whatever the rules say in the UK, whatever the law is in the UK about what constitutes gambling, let's say, okay, they may not fit the absolute criteria of what it is to be gambling in the UK, but the law can be changed. And not only that, they fit the criteria of gambling in everything but one element. In some cases, you can actually take a cash prize. But that's all but irrelevant, because every other aspect of these games is like gambling. Everything from the flashing lights and the inducements to play one more time, through to the fact that you get a prize at the end of it, which may or may not be something that you want. That's gambling. And we need to educate the broader public, especially when they're playing games like FIFA, which are for 4 and up. Yes, Phil, we need to educate people, but not in the direction you're talking about. Because when you're putting these mechanics into games for children, in effect, games with certificates of 4 and up, you're not just interested in fleecing the whales, the people who are already prone to spending a lot of money. What you're doing is you're trying to induce kids into that world. You're trying to make more whales. And I don't necessarily think that Phil Spencer would be happy about that idea. I don't know the guy, but I get the feeling that he wouldn't necessarily be happy with the idea of kids playing games and being induced into what in effect is gambling. But nevertheless, that is what's happening. And not only that, it's happening in such a way that it's now affecting game development. And I made a video about this almost 3 years ago now, I think, about FIFA. and how the development of FIFA had suffered as a result of the focus on Ultimate Team. The core of the game wasn't improving. Year on year, FIFA hasn't changed much for 5 years now? Maybe more. And so what they're doing is they're looking at maximising the Ultimate Team, maximising the profit they can make from the Ultimate Team. It's chasing the money. It's greed, pure and simple. And shareholders? Well, look, the reality is that shareholders don't give a damn what industry it is. For the most part, you'll get the odd one or two who might be gamers, but most of them, the vast majority of them, often they're like Locust. They move from one company to the next, and they will strip it of its assets and take as much money as they can and move on. And as I say, there are some people who buy shares who sit in a company for years and take their dividends and all the rest of it, and they're not interested in that. But there's enough of them out there who are interested in doing this to make profit and profit only. And it's a short-term goal, and that's not good for the gaming industry. And, there are no real consequences to what's going on for the CEOs. People like Andrew Wilson and Bobby Kotick and Strauss Zelnick. These people, you look at them and you think, you're not interested in video games. You're interested in making as much money as you possibly can for you and your shareholders. And okay, fine, that's, in some respects, that's perfectly valid. But in doing that, these guys are running down the gaming industry. The AAA gaming industry is a shadow of what it was 10 years ago. And even you go back even further than that. The AAA gaming industry has got worse, not better. The games have got worse, not better. And okay, superficially they might look better. The reality is that, the graphics have improved and all the rest of it. But have stories improved? Has the gameplay improved for the most part? I'm not sure that it has. Any number of these games you can look at and you can say they are shells. They are shells in order to make you spend money. They're the flashing lights on the entrance to the emporium, the gambling emporium. Wake up, people. If you are defending these games, if you're defending games like Anthem, if you're defending games like FIFA, if you're defending games like Call of Duty, you need to wake up. They are not games anymore. They're ways of inducing people to spend money. And that is purely what they're about. And I know some of the developers who are working on them are probably doing their best to make the best games they can. But without wanting to get into that side of things, they're not being treated particularly well either. Everybody's losing here apart from the CEOs and the shareholders, and they're making a nice packet while they're creating more and more addicts and taking more and more money, lining their own pockets and ruining our industry. Because that's what's happening. The gaming industry, the AAA gaming industry specifically, is being ruined. It's time for regulation. I hate to say it, but it is. These guys show no interest in policing themselves and sorting this out, with the possible exception of Phil Spencer, who says that maybe it needs to be sorted out by the ESRB. But he thinks we need to be educated and the legislators need to be educated rather than the people with problems needing to be educated. So, yeah, we need legislation, and we need it sooner rather than later. But anyway, that's what I think. You guys might think I'm talking a load of old rubbish, and if you do, let me know in the comments. And I'll put you right and tell you why you're talking rubbish yourselves. But in the meantime, I'm going to go and get myself a cup of tea, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.